As a Chinese American, this whole idea of Thanksgiving caused an identity crisis within me and caused me to struggle with what really matters, especially as I pursued to be a Christian. On the one hand, as an American, Thanksgiving feels like it's a normative part of our lives. After all, we celebrate it at least once a year. And so as an American, as I read scripture and I read Paul's epistles, and he says over and over again, like a broken record, and give thanks. Oh, and by the way, give thanks. And whatever I just told you to do it in thanksgiving. And so I would gloss this over and think, well, nothing to it. Obviously, I'm supposed to give thanks. And yet as a Chinese, when it comes to giving thanks, it felt very uncomfortable and foreign to me. For the Chinese culture, we have this strong emphasis of a group identity so much more than the individual identity. At the same time, our self-value and self-worth was dependent upon our work ethic and by what we can contribute out of duty and responsibility for the betterment of our group, whether the group is our family or our society. And so when it came to giving thanks or receiving thanks, in our culture, it's better to say, no thanks necessary, it was just my job. And so as a result, Thanksgiving often felt very wrong to me. And yet, ironically, Paul's reiteration of to give thanks is a helpful reminder for whatever culture you're from, whether it's more American or Western, or whether it's more Chinese or Eastern. First, to the American, Paul's continued reminder of giving thanks is to let us know that the concept of Thanksgiving is not an American idea that was created in 1621. It is first and foremost God's idea. If you do a very simple English word search in a Bible program, it'll first come up in Leviticus as an instruction to give a sacrifice of thanks offering. As Christians, we often think that offering is always given in light of the negative things that we have done for blatant sin. And yes, it's true. You have the burnt offering, you have the sin offering, and you have the guilt offering. And in light of those offerings, is to let us know that we are always going to be in debt to God for our lives for the sins that we have done. And the sin offerings, or the offerings that we give for those negative choices of sin, barely scratch the surface to deal with that debt. When it comes to the thank offering, it is meant to remember the ongoing goodness of God, such that when David actually institutes into music of giving thanks, you have the repeated phrase, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, his love endures forever." So in the same way of being in debt to the negative choices that we have done, we are also in debt to God's goodness and the fact that he is always giving to us never-ending goodness through his love, things that we never earned, things that we never deserved, things that we could never have obtained on our own, and he's always giving it to us. For the Eastern cultures, remember that Paul is writing in the context of 1st century AD in the Roman Empire. The Roman culture also had that sense of heavy duty and responsibility, but for their sake, it was for the sake of the Roman Empire. My professor of New Testament Greek studied all the non-Christian Greek literature in the 1st century AD, and he made an amazing observation. He noticed that before Jesus and the early Christian writings, there was very little to almost no content of talking about giving thanks. It wasn't until after the Christian writings of Paul percolated throughout the area that this idea of giving thanks was become more widely known and accepted and even attempted to use. My professor would argue that if it wasn't for the Hebraic origins of giving thanks and offering, and if it wasn't for the Christian literature thereafter, there would be no such thing as giving thanks today. And while I know that for many of us, this year has been especially hard, there is this ongoing reminder from God of his enduring love. It is also because of Jesus Christ giving thanks on his last meal. It is because of Jesus Christ dying and resurrecting. It is because of Jesus' promise of his one day to return that we can give thanks. This is why Paul says, "Give thanks in all circumstances, for it is the will of God in Jesus Christ for you."